Welcome back everybody to Magic with Randy. I am Randy and today we're breaking down the standard metagame yet again. It's been a minute since I did this, mainly because I've been focusing on Modern with the Modern RCs going on right now. We've had a couple of them happen last weekend. We have the US one happening this coming weekend if you're watching this anytime recently. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the breakdown of what's going on in standard this past weekend. So starting off on the Friday challenge, we had 4 Dimir bounce decks, 4 Esper bounce deck, 4 Golgari mid-range, 3 Jeskai Convoke, 2 Gruul aggro, 2 Domain mid-range, 2 Mono Red, 2 Caretakers, and then a bunch of different 1-0s there. Notably, we had some black-white tokens, black-white sack. We had a red-green Sluggers deck, a whole bunch of just everything. People were just throwing everything at the wall for this challenge, it seems like. Whole bunch of different 1-0s in there, a bunch of 2-0s and things like that. Not really too surprising. We're seeing Dimir and Esper bounce still be the prominent mid-range tempo strategy you want to call playing out. Esper bounce kind of it was kind of the highlight. It took off out of nowhere, kind of came up out of nowhere, and it has just continued to stay at the top and do well. It's not going anywhere. It's a deck you have to be prepared for any of the RCQs you're playing in, or any of the challenges you're playing in, things like that. Nothing too crazy. Dimir bounce has kind of taken over what used to be Dimir mid-range game plan. Essentially, it's just a little more proactive, a little bit better game plan. I think Esper bounce is still better than the Dimir plan as a whole, but Dimir, Esper bounce are kind of the two big decks. Golgari mid-range still keeps making this comeback. And putting up these numbers consecutively. I'm not sure why people are still high on the deck. In my opinion, I don't think it's a very good place to be. I'm just not a fan of the deck as a whole, not like I used to be, at least when we first started this RCQ season. Jeskai Convoke still, putting up numbers, not too surprising. I think it's still a very well positioned deck. It does well against the bounce decks because it just overruns the board to where your bounce, your this town ain't big enough, isn't really doing anything. You're not bouncing a crucial part when they have 4 1/1s. Bouncing one of them doesn't really make a difference. Type situation there. A little surprising to see only 2 Gruul aggro. I think that's still kind of like the de facto best aggressive deck we have in the format. Definitely something to be prepared for. It is nice to see aggro kind of like slowly falling back. Essentially, we're kind of going back into this mid-range soup, if you will, for standard as a whole, which is kind of what standard usually devolves into a lot of times. Is you'll get into these mid-range soupy style formats where mid-range is just kind of becomes the king because of how limited standard is as a whole and how it just is set up. It's always set up to kind of be a mid-range strategy game plan. Just for its existence, basically. Interesting, we have this Jeskai combo deck. Here's only one copy. It's that Azorius combo deck that we saw, I want to say probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now. That kind of rose out of nowhere, kind of caught people by surprise, doing the Omniscience thing. It's really just Jeskai for another card in the sideboard, basically. Kind of cool to see it come up and start seeing some more play. That being said, though, the deck that did take down the tournament was the Dimir bounce package, so nothing too crazy here. This is kind of what I expected Dimir bounce to kind of inevitably come into. Is we're running the Kaitos, we're running the Enduring Curiosities as kind of our way to always recoup card advantage. We're still playing Signer Spyglass, Fear of Isolation, Hopeless Nightmare, Storm Chaser's Talent, Nowhere to Run, all these good things. We're still playing a couple Go for the Throats just as ways to have answers to some of the bigger creatures or some of the more challenging things to kill with Nowhere to Run. And of course, four of this town ain't big enough because that card has surprised I think everybody in standard with how well it did or how well it is doing. I don't think anyone ever thought that card was going to be a mainstay staple in multiple decks. Sideboard is kind of what we expected. It kind of keeps changing throughout the tournaments you go to, things you see. There's no really one sideboard that's been the same. This one running 2 more additional removal spells in the cut down. 2 negates of Ghost Vacuum, Duress, Get Out is another counter spell. The Melissa's is like, oh my gosh. Alyssa's Eclipse, which I'm still mispronouncing. Holy crap! There for the Convoke decks, Tidebinder there, Shieldred, Blot Out, Dix Command, kind of as our top end removal and top end answers. Just pretty generic. Like I said, this is pretty much kind of how I expected the Dimir bounce deck to eventually fold into, kind of like that mixture between the bounce package and the mid-range package. So it's kind of cool to see this deck kind of come full circle. And like I said, the sideboards are going to keep changing depending on what people expect for the meta, essentially. Going on to Saturday, then our first challenge here, we had 8 Esper bounce decks. So Esper bounce came to show that it is dominant. 4 Gruul aggro decks, 4 Golgari mid range, 3 mono red, 3 Dimir bounce, 2 of those Jeskai combo decks this time, 2 Jeskai Convoke, and then a bunch of different 1-0s with like a Jund Delirium and Dimir Oculus kind of being the weird outliers there. So again, not too surprising seeing, Esper bounce putting up, 25% of the meta of the top 32. Not too surprising by any stretch. Gruul aggro and mono red kind of being a little bit more prevalent this time, which isn't too surprising. I am still surprised to see people are still just playing the mono red version. I'm not sure why people don't just, everyone's not just on Gruul aggro. I just think that's, if you're gonna play an aggro deck, I think Gruul is just a better standpoint to be. It's not like it's a lot more money to go from mono red to Gruul. That's just my personal opinion. If you're gonna play aggro, might as well just play the best color combination with it, being that Gruul pile essentially. Golgari still putting up numbers. Kind of surprising that Jeskai combo deck put up 2 numbers this time instead of just 1. Maybe it's starting to catch on a little bit more. People are starting to play it a little more. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that. That being said, though, Jund Delirium was actually the deck that took down this tournament, which sounds weird to say because it's Jund Delirium is one of those decks that's existed in the metagame, in the sense of you can play these cards, you can register them. They have this keyword on them, Delirium, and then usually you go 0-2 and go home. So it is kind of interesting to see this deck actually do well. Kind of cool as a whole. It's kind of more of like a little low to the ground aggro deck, essentially. Just trying to trigger off its Delirium, which it has the Patchwork Beast for an artifact and a creature. You get to play Fear of Missing Out, which is like an enchantment and creature. The Wildfire Wicker Folk is also a artifact and a creature. Then you got your sorceries in your instance. You also the 3 Ren and Realmbreaker as like a planeswalker. Then you got your lands as well. You can kind of try to get your Delirium as easily as you can here in standard. It's not Pioneer or Modern where it's super easy. You can get Delirium on turn 2 in Modern. This is a little bit more challenging, a little more work to do that, but just cool to see this deck start to put up a number. I think that it's always interesting to see standard still kind of evolving and still proving that you can kind of take quote unquote anything to a tournament and win. Obviously, I think if you're trying to really spike a tournament or anything like that, or spike your RCQs, I don't suggest taking Jund Delirium per se. Obviously, if that's something you want to play, that's something you feel comfortable with, do it. I'm not going to stop you by any means. I've taken my fair share of bad decks and definitely try to jam them in much higher tournaments than RCQs with the copium that this time for sure it's going to work. But that being said, I don't think this is I think it's interesting to see people still innovating, people still doing different things in the things in standard and in the tournaments, showcasing you don't just have to play Esper Bounce or Gruul aggro to win one of these tournaments. Speaking though of those different type decks, this is the Omniscience combo deck that I showcased a couple weeks ago. It's now Jeskai, quote unquote, mainly thus for the heroic reinforcements in the sideboard. When you're comboing off with the invasion, you get to go get cards from your sideboard. Heroic intervention or heroic reinforcements gives you creatures. I think it makes two 1/1s, or makes 2 1/1s, and your creatures have haste or something like that for 4 mana. Or something like that. You get some number of 1/1s and maybe something else, and they have haste. That's what matters. But you can keep recasting the spell then in infinitely, so you can just make up, get to where you have, 100 creatures attacking and with haste, so you can win the game on the same turn. Um, Kind of like the big thing that this deck got to do, or as an upgrade with this deck, instead of you could combo off, but not necessarily kill them on the same turn you're comboing off. Now you don't have to worry about them top decking or getting something to get out of the situation that is now stuck with they're going to lose the same turn that you're comboing off. So kind of cool to see this deck still doing numbers, or still putting up some numbers. I'm not sure how good this deck actually is. It feels a little weak to me. It feels kind of hard to beat against Graveyard Hate. Like if you have some solid Graveyard Hate in your sideboards and stuff, you're just gonna run over them. So be interested to see how this deck kind of keeps evolving, and if it keeps doing well versus gonna be on like the fringes of playability type situation moving forward. But it has put up, we had one in the last challenge on Friday, we had two on the first challenge on Saturday, so it is putting up some numbers. It's not just floundering. It is doing something, but we'll see if it's a real deck, quote unquote, to speak, or if it's just fringe playability and just some hardcore people who really enjoy the deck are innovating on it. That being said, moving on to the second challenge then for Saturday, we did have 7 Dimir Bounce decks in the top 32, followed by 4 Esper Bounce, 4 Rule Aggro, 3 Golgari Midrange, 3 Mono Red, 2 Azorius Convoke, 2 Dimir Midrange, 2 Jeskai Convoke, and then a bunch of different one-ofs, including 1 Azorius Control, because there's always that masochist out there who likes playing that. And Sultai Tempo still putting up 1 number. Nice to see my deck still doing well. I still think it's really well positioned in the metagame. I think that Sultai Tempo has gotten some new tools as well out of Aether Drift that's just coming out this weekend. So happy to see that deck, or the deck, still putting up numbers. Happy to see what happens with it. Definitely have to prepare for Standard here sooner than later. But not too surprising seeing Dimir Bounce, putting up 7 copies, Esper Bounce right behind it with 4. Like I said, both these two decks are kind of vying for first place on which one you should play. I think the Esper is probably a little bit better as a whole, but Dimir is definitely a little bit more well-rounded in the sense of you don't have necessarily the explosiveness you can get with the Esper Bounce, where you can just kind of just cascade into a bunch of flyers that have 4 or 5 power on them. But you do get that ability to have like perfect mana essentially with your Dimir Bounce, and kind of like guaranteed card draw if we're playing the Curiosities and the Kaidos, things like that. So it's a little bit like reassurance, a little bit more savability as a whole. I do like that, a little bit more explosiveness, but I am someone who likes to kind of take that coin flip chance where explosiveness can kind of pay off and work in your advantage as a whole. That being said, though, the Gruul aggro deck did end up winning. This one is playing 4 Leyline of Resonance, so it is more the all-in type type build that we have seen before. We saw this at the Spotlight Series in Atlanta. This style of deck winning the whole tournament, so kind of cool to see this this deck still doing well as a whole. Not too surprising as a whole. Playing the 2 Calisel Swords as well, extra ways to throw our creatures at our opponent, give us an extra little bit of chip damage or surprise factor that they may not be ready for. Notably playing 4 Obstinate Balaloth in the sideboard there against the Esper Bounce decks, Dimir Bounce decks, being able to have something to sideboard in against them, to gain life, as well as to get it into play free, putting more pressure in against them. So kind of a cute little trick you see there. Excuse me, sorry about that. Still trying to get over this cold. But I like this deck. I think it's very interesting. I think it's kind of cool that we have like this kind of all-in combo deck that makes it worth playing Leyline in a sense. Now obviously you get a lot of like non-games with this, in the sense of you keep you having a super aggressive game 1, or sorry, super aggressive hand game 1 type situation where you can get some non-games where you're just like, you put in Leyline on turn 0, you play your 1 drop, and your opponent goes tap land, and you're like, cool, I just get to win. So obviously it doesn't feel bad in Magic, but there are some of the coin flips you get to take with this deck. There's also the chances when you draw your ley lines on turn 3 or turn 2 and turn 3 instead of in your opening hand. That feels real good. But no, it's interesting to see this deck still doing well. Like I said, it made that took down the Spotlight series in Atlanta. Really surprising. I think a lot of people were not ready or prepared for Leyline to be coming back. A lot of people kind of thought that was dead, and now we're seeing, even a month later, or not, I guess not a month later, but weeks later, it's still coming up, still putting up numbers. So going on to the last challenge then on Sunday, we did have Gruul Aggro putting up 7 copies, reminding everyone that it did take down one of the challenges on Saturday. Then Esper Bounce with 6, Golgari Midrange with 5, Azorius Convoke with 3, Domain with 3, 2 Caretakers, and then a bunch of one-ofs. So nothing too crazy here. Gruul Aggro kind of retroactively, getting more copies. We're seeing more people play it. It just took down one on Saturday, so people on Sunday probably try to run it back, try to do what that player just did. Esper Bounce, of course, putting up numbers. Golgari Midrange still putting up numbers despite me not understanding it. I just don't think the deck's good. I'll die on that hill. Domain putting up 3 copies, kind of surprising. That deck's kind of like, that deck, I swear that deck just kind of falters as it stands. I think it's a much more prevalent deck in paper than it is online. I don't know why, at least here in Ohio for sure, or like the Ohio area, people love their Domain. I don't know what it is. They really love that deck. So it's always more popular here in paper than it ever is online. Just a weird little thing. But that being said, Domain did take down the tournament. Playing, 3 of the Zers. Not too surprising. Zer has been really the way that Domain has still been around or been able to live. Still playing, the 4 green overlords, 2 of the blue overlords, 3 of the white overlords. Running Temporary Lockdown, Day of Judgment, and Leyline Binding as like their big removal spells, up to Beanstalk as your way, and then Elspeth's Smite plus Seize from Slumber, Luminous Rebuke. There's all these like little interactive spells they need to have against the low to the ground aggressive decks or get lost. And then the sideboard is definitely there for kind of more the anti-aggro type plan. You see here with 3 Authorities Council and Elspeth's Smite. Opposite Baloth, which is good for the aggro matchups, as well as the bounce matchups. Same thing with that Visa. Another Temporary Lockdown, another Sunfall. Just a lot more of the game plan for the aggressive decks, and then you got some negates and stuff against the mirror matches or the Caretaker's Talents type decks, and then the same thing with the Nissa. So not too surprising. This deck hasn't really changed too much. It's doing a lot more lower to the ground type stuff. You'll see, like I said, with the Elspeth Smite, the Seize from Slumber, and the Luminous Rebuke all in the main deck now. There's a lot more like low to the ground type creature, or low to the ground removal spells type situation there. So not too surprising. I think the deck is still overall not terribly positioned. I'm not too sure how the bounce matchup is against it. It feels like one of those things where like game 1 is probably super dependent on if they get to cast multiple up the Beanstalks, or if you can get them out of their hands fast enough, or get them to be hellbent fast enough type situation. Because obviously this deck plays 1 or 2 Beanstalks and then starts just casting 1 or 2 Overlords. The card draw just gets overwhelming, and there's no way you're gonna bounce your discard spell enough to really make an impact in their hand type situation. So I think it's a lot of big play against that. So I think that like the reason why we don't see this deck so much is it is kind of not a good matchup against Esper, but it's not, or against the bounce decks, but it's not a terrible matchup against the bounce decks. And it's just one of those weird things where I think that Zer is not a bad deck to take. I just don't think it's a very good deck as a whole. I think you're going to win a lot of coin flips that you don't necessarily want to have to always be trying to win type situation where, your game 1s against aggressive decks are usually more favored towards the aggressor deck. Obviously, you can get to 5 mana and have, a Zer activation up. It is this kind of a game over situation, but it is also trying to get to, 5 mana and get in that position and do this and do that type situation. You have all these little pieces you have to get together to make it work. So not too surprising to see this deck not see so much play. It's not as flashy or as fun to play as the bounce decks and things like that. It's also just it is what it is, I guess. That being said, though, I think the metagame as a whole for standard is pretty well positioned. I don't think it feels like anything is, taking over by any stretch of the imagination. I think even if we just go back to this last challenge, yes, there's a lot of aggressive decks, there's a lot of bounce decks running around, but it's definitely not anything to where I don't feel like, you are pressured into playing either, the Gruul aggro deck or the bounce deck, or you're losing type situation. I think that you can take a lot of different decks and you can take and win a tournament, win a challenge, win an RCQ. As long as you know your matchups, you have a game plan in your sideboard type situation, you have a little bit of luck on your side, because ultimately what it takes to win any kind of tournament is a little bit of luck along with a lot of skill. So that being said, though, I don't think there's anything wrong with what the metagame's doing. I'm looking forward to see what Aether Drift adds into the standard set. See if it changes anything up majorly. If it's just going to be a little like couple cards here, couple cards there type situation. What maybe new archetypes or decks get birthed or rebirthed because of Aether Drift. So it'll be interesting to see. But as always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And let me know what you guys are most excited for out of Aether Drift. Love to hear from you, and I'll catch you guys next time.